Hello.
Hi.
How's it going?
It's going well. How's your life treating you?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. And this is the second episode of third, right? This is the third episode. We only published one. We have one stashed, and this is the third episode of podcast Biweekly, and hosts are still there. It's you, Slava Rudnitsky.
And you're Dima Malenko. Today we are going to run one hour of our favorite formats of show. It's the book club. I think we've done about a dozen in this season one.
Mm-hmm.
But right now, it's a special occasion because that's a book that I've been delaying to read for about 6 years.
Well,
and eventually we came here.
I need to know the story. You delayed reading this book for 6 years, and I guess I listened to this book 1.8 times in a week. How come? First, what's the book? What's the book for our listeners?
The book is named Pitch Anything by Oren Klaff. And apparently it's about pitching.
Oh, yeah.
About 6 years ago, I've heard about it from my friend who advised chapter 2.
Oh.
So what I did, I bought a book and I read just chapter 2. And it seemed fine. And then maybe I should read more. And the book has been sitting on the shelf since then.
Interesting. Yeah, that kind of makes sense. I also have books like that.
So I believe that we have a little, not follow-up, but miss.
Well, yeah, we don't really have follow-up somehow. Maybe next time. I had since we changed the description of the podcast, and it now says friendly conversations about life, engineering, management, and learning and stuff like that. I wanted to bring a bit of life into the podcast, and it's I'm not sure if this is an entirely interesting story, but still, I think it's a bit remarkable. My daughter is about to enter sixth form next year, so this is like in UK. This is the last stage of school before the university, and we are looking for maybe changing school for that for those last 2 years to give her better chances of entering a university. So now we are going through open days in multiple different schools across London, and in those open days, they are fun and interesting in their own way. It almost made me want to go back to school or back to uni. But what was remarkable in the context of podcasts was that on the occasions where teachers described their subject or something like that, every single time they were telling hey, we have these facilities, we have these labs, we have this library with these books, and we also provide students with extra additional materials to go deeper. And those materials include videos, kind of lectures from universities, visiting professors, podcasts, and something and something else. And every single time podcasts were there. So I thought isn't that remarkable that the podcast is now kind of a mainstream media, including for learning. I was surprised by that.
No, I think that at least in Ukrainian context, academia just starts discovering this format and the idea that you could have these audio recordings somewhere there. It's about 10 years behind from our Western partners, but still never too late.
Yep. So I thought it was interesting. So now back to book, I guess.
Yep. And as always, my first probably confusing question. What's your overall impression after reading the book?
I've been waiting for this question, and I have something to say. Slightly controversial, I guess. To be honest, I did not exactly enjoy reading / listening to the book, but I really enjoy having read it. Well, having listened to it and thinking about what I've read and how I apply that in my life. And then the reason I said I listened to it 1.8 times, I wanted to do it, kind of re-listen it to refresh for this discussion, because I was about some of the elements that I was thinking too deep, and was afraid that I might forgot something about and bring it to the discussion.
So you're saying that the style of the book is probably not your cup of tea, but it's thought-provoking, so you enjoyed the post-effect.
Yes. I guess in a sense, to me, it's a bit similar to Start With Why, where the ideas and stuff make sense, and quite a lot of sense, actually. But the rationalization behind that and explanations and the models offered by author, no good for me, at least.
All right. We'll get deeper into this book. I actually share your impression about somehow shallow grounds for the book itself. But that's generally fine, because it was helpful 6 years ago when I first read chapter 2. And now after re-watching, re-listening, re-reading, reviewing the material, I still had some insights. And I think that's what a book is for, actually. It's not always necessarily like a research or an encyclopedia that tells you the hard facts about something. But if it's thought-provoking, it's half of the job done.
Definitely. Like you're almost saying what I'm thinking, like almost word to word. It's like at some point I was thinking, like, I would, if it were not for our podcast that we need to discuss this book, I think I may have dropped it like halfway. But then, like, the thoughts and ideas I have after reading it are great, and the word shallow came to my mind more than once when I was thinking about, like, how would I describe, how would I relate to this book.
So I suggest that we go through the structure first to give our listeners a little overview of what it is. It's basically 8 chapters, and the first one is about the method and some background. I still think you could probably skip this one.
Also, maybe we should give spoiler alert or something to the readers, to listeners, and tell them that, hey, maybe you want to read this book or maybe not before listening to the further discussion.
Nah.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Let's move on then.
So Oren created his own method of pitching, that he claims is based on neuroscience, whatever that word means to Oren Klaff.
No. It is based, like, it's not neuroscience, it's neurofinance.
Even worse. Then there is chapter 2. It's one of the sections of this method, which is named frame control. But in my understanding, it was actually the main topic of the book. And then in all different aspects, it was just somehow reshaped or looked from the different angle. But still, most of the things that I've listened, or maybe it was just my focus that I was catching those, but in the further chapters, frame control was brought up very frequently.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I'd agree. It was kind of at the core of the rest of the discussions in the book.
Chapters 3 and 4 about status and pitching your big ideas are kind of fast. Like, there are just a few examples and moving up further. Then there is chapter 5 about hot cognitions. I think this one actually deserves discussing because there are some...
This one
it was one of the thought-provoking parts of the book, apart from chapter 2. And I definitely enjoyed chapter 6, which is named Eradicating Neediness. I think I intuitively agree with this idea a lot, and even though it probably didn't have any background, I really think that, for instance, I've already advised it to my salespeople to look through, because this thing is actually a thing for Ukrainians right now whenever we pitch things. Chapter 7 is a case study. I think this one is also interesting. And chapter 8 are some tips how to start. Meh, again.
Right. But I agree. So now that we skimmed through the book, one other way I came up with describing my impressions going through the book was that it was, to me, it was like looking at the high-speed chase. Like in the US, in the news, you can sometimes see that there is a runaway car on the highway, there is a helicopter in news, and then they film all of that. Like same situation, but the car kind of goes backwards. Like it drives backwards. Like how do you say this in English when you switch to rear gear and drive? So the car goes backwards that way, and it is kind of successful. So it manages to stay away from the police, but it does so like the chase works as it should, but it does look very wrong and can break at any moment. Now, this is what I also like my feelings when I was reading the book. Like some things make sense, but for different and wrong reasons, and yeah, maybe let's go into that. So
I'd suggest that we start with chapter 2, which introduces the idea of frame control. And by framing, Oren means the overall control of the situation, I'd say. So whoever is in the lead of the conversation. And he introduces some examples like the power frame or the intrigue frame or the time frame whenever the person is taking initiative or retaking initiative in the conversation. And overall, remembering some of my negotiations and sales activities and pre-sale stuff and even pitching itself, it kind of works. I'm not sure about the specific titles, and I have some doubts about the pricing frame that I think is kind of culturally different in the United States and in Ukraine. The moral authority frame is also different, and the example with the police officer. But overall, the concept that in order to have a dynamic conversation and to keep people engaged, you should kind of play this push and pull game where you are mostly in control. And in control means that you are holding the attention of the person. And this framing system, deframing, reframing, and other words with frame, kind of helps you think of different approaches, how to get this attention during the meeting or during the pitch or during the negotiation.
Yep, totally agree with that. This frame thing was a bit, and probably still is a bit confusing to me, the way Oren describes it, because I think initially he starts with an idea that frame is more of a mindset that people have for looking at the situation, which kind of makes sense. But then he also puts forward an idea that when people start talking or negotiating or pitching, the frames they bring to the conversation collide to form, and then one of those frames kind of wins and becomes dominant for the room where the discussion goes. And then kind of I can buy, maybe I can see this model, but then when he introduces something like intrigue frame, where you just throw in a hook, like half-told story, and like, wait, a minute ago a frame was a mindset, a way of thinking about the world, and now we call this just half-told story an intrigue frame. It's like, what's going on? I think in some situation he refers to frame more of kind of, if we have a film script or like movie script or a play, it would have a scene, right? And divided all action would be divided into scenes, and so I think that intrigue frame would be like an intrigue scene in the script, whereas I would keep the term frame for truly for this mindset kind of thing. And from that point of view, it's almost like I'm saying, like it's almost word to word for what I had in mind when I was listening to this. This is the idea behind this frame control is actually like attention control. You want attention of the other party so that at least you have a chance of getting your message across. If you don't have attention, like, there is almost zero chance of getting any message across, be it pitching an idea or deal or just telling them about your name or birthday.
And I think I had pretty similar thoughts in chapter 3 about the status, because there Oren was trying to bring in some alpha examples, that somebody has to be dominant and somebody has to be submissive, I guess, yeah. And I kind of didn't like the examples that he was showing there, but the idea that it's possible to catch an attention of a person who has an authority in the room by doing something unusual is quite interesting. And that's what works for my cases or my examples. I think I wouldn't explain it through the idea that people put sofas in the lobby to keep you waiting or put secretaries to get your status lower or something along those lines. But the idea that people actually set up the rules around the status, and when I think of, let's say, a legal company that put all these diplomas on the walls and different statues and artifacts on the table to show or highlight the importance of the person who works in this room or in this office, kind of makes sense. And the idea that you are able to avoid the influence of the status and not play according to the rules of this place, but according to the rules that you can set up together in the conversation is intriguing.
I would agree with that. Like the chapter 3 and this whole idea about status and dominance is something that I didn't like at all. It sparked to me being very American in a sense, like stereotypical American, like in some movies when there are like martial arts competitions and then there are participants from different countries. Americans always are portrayed as like having a blunt force trying to push through and then kind of win, kind of unsophisticated kind of competitors compared to some others. And this is what the image that was sparked in my mind by whole this dominance thing. And I don't think it quite works this way. It does work this way from attention grabbing point of view, but I think having attention is not the same as dominance. They can overlap, but they do not necessarily require one or the other. And was it in this chapter that he gave an example of French restaurant? Because I thought that he was trying to illustrate this, to use this example to illustrate this idea of like how dominance and like driving what's happening is important. And I thought it was quite the opposite of what he was trying to say, what he illustrated with this example.
One of the challenges I had is that while reading chapter 2, I could picture myself doing these things. So I could say that, yes, that's what I could do during the negotiations. I could ask this sort of question. I could go for this. But in the status chapter, there was another example with a few analysts and a big boss who was eating an apple and showing that he's disinterested in the conversation quite a lot. And then Oren just took a knife, cut half an apple, and used it as an example for his big idea. I think that every time he tackled this issue that if you would like to break the power frame, you should disrupt the situation in a polite but shocking way. I don't think I can actually come up with any alternative ideas except for the ones in the book, the way to do it. So it's not very clear how to disrupt this situation or status quo.
I can see that, and I think maybe the example he given with taking an apple and cutting it in half and stuff was over dramatized, but I do think that there is, well, I may want to say always there would be an opportunity to do something unexpected. I don't think it has to be dramatic necessarily, but something unexpected to kind of refocus attention on yourself or on something like that. It can be, sometimes it can be just doing something a bit unconventional, right? If you are doing a public speaking and like other presenters go across the stage back and forth, if you break that and go into the like audience, like merge yourself with the audience, it would be different and it would be attention grabbing, but it would not be necessarily shocking or super disruptive. But sometimes you can maybe think of something more disruptive. But I think unconventional would probably be a better way to describe it.
Agree. And it made me think of a book named Tell to Win by Peter Guber. It's a book about storytelling in business, and there he brought up an example of a person who was pitching. By the way, I think we could discuss this book sometime later as well.
All right.
I forgot about it for quite a while, but speaking about an example for now, there was a situation when the guy was pitching a boxing movie, a movie about box. And he noticed that the audience, people who were making decisions, were not really into boxing. So in order to do that, he made people stand up and he started boxing with them. So not boxing, but, this like drilling jumps and hooks and hits. And while they were doing this, he was telling about the fight itself and how the storyline is going to go through. I think it could go terribly wrong, but the idea is there. So you basically change the conventional rules of the meeting itself and bring out some new emotions there. And they get people to listen to you more carefully, I guess.
Right. And I guess that also kind of ties down to the idea of that deframing. I like the word reframing a little bit more. So you give audience or listeners a different way of looking at situation, and that could work. But this chapter 2 with domination and authority, I'd skip that. Grabbing attention, yes, but domination, no.
All right. Then chapter 4 about the structure of the pitch. And I think that I overall agree with the logic that Oren suggests here, that you could introduce yourself and your big idea shortly, explain the budget and the secret sauce in a bit details, but it's 5 and 10 minutes accordingly. Then offer a deal in 2 minutes, and then see how people react and negotiate with them for the rest of the time. Based on articles I've read about pitching and different sorts of advice, recommendations I got from people who do pitch things to investors, this timing and this structure makes sense to me, because that's what people actually care about. It's what's your idea, who you are, and how much.
I guess so. I have two thoughts about that chapter, or that part, or the whole idea of pitching everything in 20 minutes, as the timing suggests. I kind of have hard time accepting that you can really sell people on an idea with like budget and something in 20 minutes. It may be, those 20 minutes may be an important part of what's going on, but they may or may not be even definitive part of the process. If you have a brilliant pitch, but the project itself does not compute when people look at this later on, I mean, the perfect pitch is not going to save that, probably. I think that there is one thought, and another one was, you know me, I forgot.
There was another one. But
yeah, there was another one. I think it maybe will come back to life.
Then this chapter 5 was mostly about stacking those hot cognitions, the way Oren named them. But the idea was that you could build up your presentation or pitch by using different attention grabbers. At first, the intrigue, then showing the benefit, then building the necessity to make a decision sometime soon, and then closing with some sort of moral aspect or ethical aspect why it's a good thing to do overall. And again, intuitively, the overall logic does make sense to me. The explanation kind of sucks in some cases.
Right. I would totally agree. But to me, the way I would read chapter 5, and by the way, I remembered what I had about chapter 4 and those pitching stuff. But the chapter 4, the way I would read it and I would describe what's going on is that you want to have a narrative. You want to have a story to tell. You don't want to give people bullet points. You want to give them a story. And Warren describes this through those frame stacking and hot cognition. I would describe this as you want to have a story, and the story has to have an intrigue in it. Like interesting story just does have an element of intrigue in it. It has,
especially when you describe your technical decision or how you ended up using this framework. That's a lot of intrigue, right?
Wait, why not? Because there might be competitive frameworks. There might be hoops we had to jump to be able to use this framework. No, I would strongly suggest that I would argue, or I would operate on the premise that you can find compelling narrative for most anything if you spend sufficient time and are creative enough about this.
I don't know. I think that people have to relate to the story itself. And in many things, the challenges that you go through while picking a technical solution for something is mostly related just for your teammates.
No, it's not necessarily. You can. There are a billion ways to tell the story. I mean, you can tell, hey, we as a team were working on this like for 2 months. We could not crack this hard nut, and then I was like on the run in the Victoria Park, and I hit the kid who was crossing the road, and then I like smashed into the ground. And then when the intuition came about how to solve this, so that this is the story, and then you tell the boring technical details, but you got people kind of hooked a little bit. And there's a narrative.
Just think when the police will come to take you from Zoom and bring somewhere.
Yeah, because I hit the kid. No, it's, there was a bad example. Of course, you should not run over kids when you're running. But something like that can happen. Or a dog, right? The dog unexpectedly jumped in front of you and make you trip over. And then this is when the realization came to use this framework, and it would be a solution for everything. So that's a story for boring technical solution.
You know, one of the things that were kind of on the back of my mind during the reading this book, that most of the things that Oren was discussing were related to the real world itself. Like the way you behave in the room, the way you sit, the way you talk, the way you look, the way things go now. And I was trying to extrapolate that into our digital meetings these days when people come to Zoom, and basically you could be meeting a minister and it would still be the same square in Zoom as the minister's assistant or just a random dude who joined the meeting. And there is very little you can do during the meeting apart from turning off your camera to show the disrespect.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow visually get distracted into a different screen or into the phone so people would see that you are not listening. And that's pretty much it. There are no many things that could work in terms of digital meetings.
Like I said previously, I guess I would approach this from the point of view if we need to achieve something, like bring something special, like that special sauce to a meeting, even if it's an online meeting. It is, we can set this as a goal, and then it turns into a matter of finding means to do that. And like from the top of my head, if we are really invested into something like that, we can do it. You can have a meeting on your phone and start walking and showing stuff. You can have a cameraman that will, like, it will start like a normal Zoom meeting for you. And like I'm sitting and camera is facing me, like up front. But then it starts moving and showing different things. I think if one sets a goal to make it interesting, they can find means to do that. And it's similar to like presentations by huge companies like Apple. Like they were known for their impeccable performances when they introduced new iPhones, but those were live performances with audiences, stages, and so on. When COVID came, everyone was intrigued, like, what are they going to do? Like, how their events were always special. How can they make them special when they're entirely online? And they found a way to make them special. They were almost like movies. So I would argue that it's not impossible. Let's put it this way.
Right, fair enough. I guess we could jump to chapter about the neediness, and Oren's idea behind that was that if you feel needy about closing the deal, people will feel that and will probably not be as attracted to your suggestion as they would be if you felt more self-sufficient and didn't need this terribly. That pretty much matches my experience in negotiations, where I feel confident and I think that I can easily give up or walk away from the deal. The deal will most likely be closed in my favor. Whenever I think that I do need the deal, I make some very unfavorable decisions. I accept conditions that I wouldn't, and then I regret these negotiations for quite a while. And after reading this chapter, I thought, what would you do to reduce the level of neediness for some important or really, I don't know, I can't pick the word to describe it, let's say essential situations in your life, like let's say the very important job interview, like you would really love to get the job and you feel that you are kind of needy and you are not yourself while preparing to this interview.
Yeah, that's great question, and great part of the book. And like many of other things in the book, I think that the idea is very good one, that when you needy, I guess maybe it also kind of engages wrong parts of the brain. So you would have a tendency to make bad decisions, to agree to something that you would not agree otherwise because you are a bit agitated, I don't know, but by feeling that this is a very critical moment. And removing all of that from the conversation does really help. And I think Warren proposed the solution proposed by Oren was to kind of switch into like this power frame, right? Like I'm in control. I don't not need this. Like you decide right here, right now, or I'm walking away, that kind of thing. I heard this idea of removing this neediness like way before, and in a podcast that was called, maybe still called, Advanced Selling Podcast or something like that. And the idea they proposed for dealing with this was, and I like it a lot more than what Oren proposes, is abundance mindset. So like, what they suggested, that into every conversation, sales pitch, or into every negotiation, you come with abundance mindset, such that this is not the last or the only thing you can have, and kind of figuring out a way to be at peace for this deal not going through, because there would be there are many more clients, there would be many more deals in the future, so you don't have to feel like everything hangs on this particular conversation. That gives your mind enough like the required freedom to really make good decisions, and it also shows in the tone of the discussion, in the words that you are used, that send kind of right signals to the other party.
Mm-hmm. You know, I have a feeling that it kind of works for a rational approach when you have time to think about it, and if you haven't invested much, because then you have this sunk cost fallacy after preparing for an interview or digging deep into research in something. You really would like people to appreciate the idea and research, and even understand the realization that it's not the last thing, or other people might like it. Let's put it this way. When we relaunched Biweekly into season 2, we did make some preparation, and first episodes are quite important for us. Probably more important than the last episodes of the previous season, when we were just going into year 5 of another episode, of another week, of another discussion, of another story. And right now, I actually feel much more tense about the show itself and the way we approach it. So, I don't know. I think it's easy to say and hard to do.
100% agree. It's easy to say and hard to do. I definitely cannot say that I'm fully enlightened on in this area, but I think it can be sort of practiced in a way, and the way I try to practice this is kind of through like diaries and reflections. When, for example, I would have a great idea, but I would not have somehow it happens I didn't have time to communicate it, and then it kind of is lost to ether. Like it time has passed, and then I come up with a different idea. I would have a feeling that, I need to rush. I need to get this idea out before something like that, something happens similar to what happened to the previous idea where it went nowhere. But then I think, all right, so is this such a good idea? Because looking back, I can see myself, right, I felt sorry and pity for myself when I lost that first idea, but then the second idea came, and I think, all right, so if I maybe lose this second idea, it's not such a big deal, because there will be third idea later, almost for sure. So I can be more at peace with letting this idea go. And then it's similar thing. Similar kind of thinking, or maybe even philosophy, if you will, shows in my photography studies. Sometimes you would go and see a perfect composition with perfect lighting, perfect everything, and you don't have a camera with you. And you can feel like super sorry about having missed this moment. But then if you think about this, there would be another thing like this. So you can let go of this thing, not to be harsh on yourself, and overall look at the situation more, not to say rationally, maybe is not the right word, but more calmly and mindfully, something like that.
Dim, I was actually wondering why you never take notes during our episodes and you keep staying into this situation where you have 3 thoughts and you start telling about the first one and then 2 others are lost, or the last one is lost. And now I understand that you actually practice letting things go. That's
a good one.
Quite a discovery after
That's a good one.
270 episodes. I can try to illustrate it with an example. Maybe you could help me here. Let's say we have a junior specialist on the team. It doesn't matter what this person is doing there. And this person is preparing the first presentation about the results of, let's say, monthly work. There is not much. There was a lot of learning. There is a lot of tension because it's probably still either the probation period or still like the establishment period of working there. And making this first impression from managers, showing the results of your work, building the rapport, seem very, very important. So this junior person spends a lot of their time, free time, weekend time, sleep time, all other time to prepare. And by the time the presentation starts, this person is actually exhausted already because they prepared a lot.
Right.
And let's say that you are the team leader of this person and you see that there is this exhaustion level or extra intensity around this presentation. Is there any way you could decrease the neediness of this person by suggesting something, asking some sort of questions, or helping this person reflect on the situation? Like, what would be your approach to help a junior person to overcome neediness for such a demo?
Maybe you can, if you are a direct manager for that person, maybe you can give them encouraging and supportive feedback to show that they are doing, like, this level would be enough and they do not necessarily need to lose their sleep over it or something like that. I know that's kind of straightforward.
People come for such things for recognition from like a majority of the team, of like manager, of your manager, or all people who can get you. And the direct attack is a good thing. I think it would help a lot to encourage. But would it eradicate neediness?
Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe depending on the situation, maybe you can do a rehearsal of the presentation with the group, and just to show that, hey, the feedback is kind of positive overall, and it's all doing good. So you, like, the target is here, not like there, for jumping to that. But also, I would kind of think that there is a work to be done by that person as well, right? You cannot do that. You cannot solve this all from outside. They need to be willing at least a little bit to also come forward and try to solve this problem.
That's why I have this counterintuitive feeling that on one hand, it seems like very good advice, like just don't feel needy about something and you'll do much better. And that works for me, for instance, when I feel that I'm concerned about presentation or a meeting or negotiations, I would ask some of my partners to rehearse with me, to make a simulation, to discuss the roles, the functions of each other, to be better prepared. So I prepare, and when I feel prepared, I feel more confident, I come there and I hit it. But I remember that in the very, very beginning, like during the first interviews, during the first negotiations, it was almost impossible to do. And no matter how much I would prepare, I would fail during preparation, which would actually grow my anxiety because I wasn't happy. It wasn't good enough. The perfectionism was somewhere there telling me like, no, that's not the thing you need. And verbal feedback from people who watch this could be positive, but I would react to an eyebrow, like when the person during my presentation, that's it. Like I'm done. I remember my first teaching experiences. There was an observer from American English Center where I was teaching back in the days. And she was sitting at the back desk of the classroom. And every time I was doing something wrong, she would just lift the left eyebrow or the right eyebrow. I don't remember, an eyebrow. And guess what? The rest of my lesson was just a disaster. Because I knew I fucked up, and then it was just snowballing further and further and further and further. And her facial expression was there again and again. And it was reinforcing this emotion. And I'm not sure I know what I would do, even knowing what I don't know, if I didn't have this experience. Like, what would I tell to younger me not to feel neediness or appreciation or any sort of things from there?
I guess maybe an answer to that can be that failure is okay, and the way we can help other people grow is that we create conditions for them to fail kind of safely. 'Cause I definitely understand and agree to the idea that expressing something like this to someone who hasn't gone through these experiences is, I guess, next to impossible. You have to have done it yourself to be able to understand the dynamics and potential ways out. So maybe, that like the rehearsal or like pitching to a deal where we don't necessarily have high hopes of winning it, but we want to do that maybe just as a practice. That can also be a way of doing this. And yeah, definitely it takes time and effort to build this abundance mindset. But having failed multiple times myself, I can totally see how something like abundance mindset can be helpful to fail less often, let's put it this way, or at least fail for fair reasons rather than unfair reasons where you come across as begging for a deal or begging for something, and other people just discard your proposal just on this emotional response to this begginess.
I believe in one of our most popular Russian-speaking episodes about Stoic practices of Massimo Pigliucci book,
right,
there was one of the practices that you could imagine the insignificance of things that you're doing right now on the global level. Like if you think about the universe itself, the planet, or even your company overall, then decisions that you worry about on the span of, 25 years of the company activities and 25 years more to go. Actually, this goal could be overcome, changed, switched, adapted, and nothing would actually matter in the long run at all, unless you're the CEO and you're merging with someone. But apart from that, most decisions are quite forgiving.
And then what is it if not a reframing in action, right? You reframe for yourself what's going on in a slightly different way to get a different perspective on things and maybe chill out about some aspects of the situation.
As I was listening to chapter 7 about the airport, I was really curious what you'd think about it. In this chapter, Oren tells about an economic recession and his first big deal after it.
Mm-hmm.
The way he was preparing, the way he was pitching. There was an actual example of a pitch for the first time in the entire book. There was word by word thing and structure, which I'm really curious what you have to say about.
I do have things to say about it. That, again, for the benefit of our listeners, the idea was that Oren went into some sort of retirement, but then one of his former partners or clients was seeking for him or looking for him everywhere to make him work with them on a new big deal. And the new big deal was to raising money for investment into rebuilding, how was it called, like Davis Airfield in California. And this airfield has a long history, was very crucial for the Second World War effort for the war in the Pacific. But this was purely a financial kind of deal, that they needed the company that would be doing the pitch would not be doing anything with airport. They would be offering their services to raise money to the company who would be investing in rebuilding this airfield. And then Oren, through some effort and process and whatnot, they found a narrative that we should frame this whole deal not as just a financial transaction. We invest $1 billion, you invest $1 billion, you get some interest out of that, and everyone comes out happy. So that they found a way to frame it as something where those rebuilding the airport would create a real legacy for themselves and for them being aviation enthusiasts. That would be a kind of a selling moment in the deal. And after all, it went successful with that narrative. They bet to other competitors which were pitching their financial services purely on the rational platform, saying we are the highest, the biggest, the most reliable, the most experienced firm in the area.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this is one of those things. I think the end result was correct. This was the way to do that, finding the narrative of what is important for the client and giving them something that is more than just money, right? It was almost, it felt on the outside when it was presented, it could feel that this financial company would be on the same team with the client who would be rebuilding the airport, say that they wanted to do this thing together, rather than so there would be more in this relationship than just, all right, we're providing financial services to you. But the way it was described and explained why it works, I didn't like in the slightest. What do you think?
All right. I kind of was blocked at one place where they were discussing the approach to the customer. I don't really remember the name of this potential contractor who was going to rebuild Davisfield, but the idea there was that Oren at first mentioned that he didn't want to do any background checks or study the person to do the small talk, but then the entire narrative was built on actually understanding needs of people. And that was kind of counterintuitive to me, because he basically compared two different types of research. When you think about the deeper needs of your client, or when you think about just habits and social interactions and try to build the rapport on, or small talk, or just being social about the smaller things. But I think that they're actually quite important, both of the things. And I think that Oren also did both. He appealed to the needs and motives of people who are the aviators, and even that part where they invited an engineer who told about his childhood story and the football field and the way it was paved into an empty parking lot.
Mm-hmm.
The message was there, and the background work was done quite impressively. I think that this pitch is a very well prepared pitch. Even if you can cut the preparation story itself and just listen to or read, if you're going into paper, the text of the pitch itself. I think that it was well crafted.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think the example you just gave when Oren said that, hey, you should not. I did not research into the background of a person because he does not believe in small talk. He says like, no, you should not, like, small talk is a way to subordinate you, and you should not fall in for that trap and so on. But then he contradicts, because like, what helped him in this speech is understanding the background of the person, the motivations that drive them. That there were several people, right, the decision makers. And I think that this was not the only example where Warren kind of contradicted himself. Another example was when he said that a traditional sales technique which rely on kind of persistence and pushing do not work. But then he introduced this time frame when he would say like, I only have 15 minutes and then I leave and stuff like that. And I said, how is that different from old selling techniques where you pushing people towards the decision, just in a slightly different way.
I believe here I do have an answer. Oren was not mentioning the entire old school of sales where you have to be proactive and talkative and communicative or persuasive. I think the idea was there changing aggression to assertiveness and changing the mindset from always be closing into abundance mindset that you mentioned. So that would be the main difference, I'd say.
Yeah, and one other thing that struck me in this airport story was that even though Oren and his firm, they won the deal, and they kind of won it for the right reason, because I believe that they were able to offer their potential clients more than just money, right? And therefore this is how they won this deal, because maybe other firms could offer like the same amount of money, but they offered more. But the reason for which they offered more, to me, from his story, sounds like an incorrect reason. So that they were not looking for how we can be better for our client, how we can do more for them because of our expertise or whatever. They were looking for a pitch to sell an idea. So to me, that kind of circles back to the idea of shallowness, right? Even though the pitch was perfect, they found that guy who spent his entire life near the Davis airfield. Do they really believe in what they were pitching? You know what I'm trying to say? So this, is it that they just got somewhat lucky and found a way to, quote unquote, manipulate their client into this deal, or was it something that they truly believed in? And I believe that the greatest result would be if they truly believed in, like, what is the great thing we can make out of this deal, how we can make it something more than just rebuilding the airport, how we can bring in the community and provide value to the community themselves, so that this can amplify the overall output and impact of this entire enterprise. But the way Warren described this is just, we were trying to find a way to sell them on this deal, and that's it. We don't necessarily believe in this community thing. It was just a great thing, great frame game to sell our services. So yeah, that left me thinking, that story.
The more I listen to you, the more I think that Tell to Win would be an amazing book to read for our next book club episode, because it actually will show us an alternative way of storytelling and pitching things.
Okay.
But answering the question that you put into the show notes, would I recommend the book to others? The short answer is yes. And the longer answer is, I don't like arrogant authors And the only reason why I could read an arrogant author for a while is that when this author's writing is thought-provoking enough, when I get more thoughts and insights, I can get through the arrogance. When it's not thought-provoking or there is nothing to think about, of course, I'll just give up quite fast. So this book is well balanced in these regards. I do feel that there is something to think about, and it's kind of structured in the way that when I start thinking about giving up, then there is the next valuable idea that I would like to think about. So if you don't want to read the entire book, I'd suggest focusing on chapter 2 to get the big idea about the method itself. Reading chapter 6 about eradicating neediness, I think it's also very useful and thought-provoking. And in chapter 7, reading the text of the pitch about the airport, without the background, without the explanations and rationality, but the pitch itself is a nice example. So these 3 aspects are definitely worth reading. What about you? Would you recommend it to others?
My answer would be a lot less definitive. I think that what allowed me to kind of appreciate and get value out of this book was my prior experience and prior knowledge. Well, at least a little bit in this area, and I'm ever so slightly cautious about someone reading this book and taking it too close to their heart and not having any frame of reference to evaluate the ideas and the methods and the specific suggestions that author gives. So I would be cautious from that point of view. But on the other hand, I would still recommend it to anyone who overall tries to improve in this field of not necessarily selling ideas in the old straightforward sense, but just on like pitching or getting message across to other people. So if you are researching or trying to go deeper into this area, this book would be a nice addition to other sources and resources that you might read on the topic.
Mm-hmm. I believe according to the notes, you also have something to say about the French waiter story.
Yes, the French waiter story, I think it was in the power part of the book. I think, and there the story was that he brought his friends to a very fine restaurant in Paris, and he, like an American with power, like went into the restaurant with power frame. I'm paying for everything. Like everyone must do what I say, or something like that. I'm a man with a big checkbook. Like do what I say, and then the waiter and the restaurant overall, the way Warren portrays it, kind of reframed and took that power frame from him, and all the evening was controlled by a very skillful and artful, I would even say, waiter who made this whole thing a wonderful evening for the guests, even though the Oren was not exactly as happy about being in a subordinate position in this thing. And I thought this story is exactly illustrates the opposite. He was trying to use this to show the importance of the power frame, so that the waiter did the right thing by taking power away from Oren and like driving this whole thing. But I thought that this means exactly the opposite. Like Oren had a very wrong mindset going into this entire situation, right? He trying to manipulate the restaurant and do what he says, make them do what he says. He would probably create a worse or maybe even a bad experience for his guests. The best way to get most out of this was to go with the mindset, I want to do the best thing for my guests, and the best thing I can do for my guests is to let professionals run the show, and professionals are the restaurant and the waiter. So there should not have been.
I knew you would bring in the expertise thing again.
A dilemma that no, look, this waiter took power control from me. Did you really have any? Should you even have had power control in this situation as well?
I don't know. I think that it would still work. I mean, the idea that a local expert manages the flow and the process around something, a barber, a waiter, a taxi driver, you could be trying to give instructions or feedback in the process, but overall, when you come to a specific business, you basically have to play by the rules. So I'm not sure it's that illustrative, especially that we don't have any opposite examples of people who actually come and just are polite, nice, and come in time and ask for advice, and the way it works there. The only thing that came to my mind while reading about this thing was an experience of buying some clothes in an outlet not far from Kyiv. I remember this as one of my best shopping experiences ever, because the person who was helping me was not afraid to give advice and give opinions and support me a lot there in the process. So I actually came there with my friend who was buying something, and I was just window shopping there. I had no intention to buy anything. And, while waiting next to the changing room, this person came and said, well, would you like to try this jacket? I think it works fine. I had absolutely nothing to do, and it was like the 6th shop that we visited. So, yeah, why not? And what actually struck me, that after I tried it on, he said, no, that's not your style. That's not your color. I'm sorry. Give it back. Let me try something else. And I ended up buying a jacket, 2 shirts, pants, and shoes back there. So that was like a full look just collected there, because I really appreciated honest opinions and interaction, like with a friend or with a partner, not with somebody who is there to help or always to serve or give you compliments all the time. And that was an example, I think, of these attention grabbers and honest feedback used in the sales process.
Yep. That's perfect example. And I think it kind of supports my idea that this power frame game that Oren is trying to portray onto the situation is not that relevant. That there is something else going on there. It does not have to be about power.
I would also probably mention that it's very context dependent. And I believe that maybe for financial institutions, investment banks, and the industry Oren worked in, it is actually a relevant strategy that helps a lot. If you're pitching a project to an IT manager on Facebook, maybe that's not always the best thing. But what you could think about is what are the attention grabbers, what you could do differently, usably, interestingly to capture the attention and keep it until you need it.
Cool. Yeah, that's right. Keep ideas simple, find ways to get them across, and don't be afraid to do something unconventional.
So you could have compared this book with Simon Sinek's Start With Wine. That was one of our first book club experiences. What are the similarities, if you can shape them, and what are the differences?
I think the similarities to me would be that the overall kind of ideas, or higher level ideas of managing attention, being in control of the conversation, taking unconventional steps, understanding framing, the lens of how people look at the situation, and influencing their view by providing additional frames to look at, and that kind of thing. I think that those are very sound and valuable ideas, but the explanation and reason for why they are working that are given by Oren, I think, are flawed, in at least in some regards, and this is how it's similar to me to the Simon Sinek's book, because like starting with why is something I would pitch day in and day out as an idea. So you, before explaining, you need to do what people need to do. You need to explain why they want to do it. Like, what would we get in the end? But the rationale and supporting argument that Simon provided for this idea were flawed and incorrect, in like at times factually incorrect. And I think this is how this book is similar, at least to me.
After reading or listening to the book, what would be your takeaway? What would you do differently or think about more after this week?
Like one thing that I already started thinking more about is framing and narratives. In some of the areas I work on now, it is very important that we sell, in a good sense of this word, on ideas, on proposals and approaches that we put forward to multiple different other teams or parts of the company. And reading this book kind of reiterated, maybe to an extent even reignited my belief in importance of a narrative and providing right framing, and also the idea of recognizing the frames of other people and then making conscious effort to kind of reframe the conversation. Well, in a good way, because in Warren's words, sometimes that was like too aggressive and across the board for me, I think. And you're right, maybe that's applicable to financial, like purely financial market where he operates. It might be less applicable, at least directly, to other situations.
All right. I actually look forward to discussing Tell to Win with you. I think that would be an amazing follow-up to our today's talk.
All right. Sounds good. And are there any takeaways that you take with you?
Well, I have a few. Some of them are related to my team, because I do have a junior sales manager right now on the team. And I think what would be the main things I could pass without making him read the book itself, but still helping to use, because neediness is one of the things that is an actual issue for starting salespeople who have to pitch things and they're not confident yet. The other thing is how you could ecologically practice this frame control thing. And I could name it the ping pong in the conversation, when the initiative gets back and forth, and it's interesting and engaging, and it feels like a game for people, because I have a tendency to, if not dominate, but to lead the conversation intensively, and people tend to listen to what I'm saying or just answering my questions instead of bringing in something from their side. And I think that I would think how to explain to people that I work with this idea of frame control and motivating or encouraging them to try it.
Yeah, that's a good one. Eradicating neediness is a big thing. Well,
I really appreciate your investing 1.8 times of the book, which is about 11 hours.
The second time I listened to it on 2x, and to my surprise, it was okay, because with many other books, especially like fiction books, I cannot listen to them faster than just 1x.
Well, it's been nice discussing it with you, and I hope the next one will not disappoint you either.
All right, yeah, I'm sure of that.
So, good weeks.
Yep, good weeks.